Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephan Kornelius. I am the host of this webcast this afternoon that is going to cover our Trends in Asset Management report for 2025. I'm joined by two of my esteemed colleagues. The first is Dirk Janse van Rensburg, who is the Managing Director of Pragma's software business, OnKey, who's going to help us talk about the technology component of our trends. And then Philip Hanekom is one of the senior consultants in our advisory business, who had a big hand in generating this report, and we'll also be talking to some of the points related to the more technical and process-related concepts in our trends report. I'm glad that you're all here. Thank you for your time. Just some housekeeping comments. We will be running a few polls throughout the webinar just to keep everybody on their toes and get some information from the audience. So if you see a poll popping up, please feel free to voice your opinion. And as always, somebody will be monitoring the chat room. So if you have any questions or you want to stop us to ask a question in the middle of the presentation, please feel free to do so. But we are going to leave some questions for Q&A at the end of the process as well. So if you want to leave your question until the end, then we can do it like that. All right, on to business. The topic of the day is our Trends in Asset Management report. We try and publish a report every year that is very reflective of the work we do across a large client base across the world. On the screen there, you'll see our asset management improvement plan, our maturity survey, which we do with a lot of different clients. And between our research with AMIPS, our advisory work, and our software implementation, we get to see a lot of clients deal with the challenges that asset management is presenting to the business world in general. And from that, we've tried to distill what we think are 10 of the most interesting trends that are impacting the asset management and maintenance management environment at the moment. And those are all the ones that are into the report. Now, before we go into the beginning of the context, let me ask, as a matter of, and this is not a test, how many of you have on the call has actually read the report? There we go. Not everybody's done their homework. All right. So it looks like there's quite a number of the people on the call that is going to see some of this content for the first time. That's good. So then I won't get any difficult questions, which I'm happy about. But I am going to, there is a link to the QR code, and there will also be posting a link to the participants in the notes after the webinar. And so you'll be able to access the full report. So what you're going to see here are some of the slides. So that sort of describe our trends report, but there's a detailed document that describes all of our content in a lot more detail. So if you are interested in any of the topics, that you can feel free to download the report and have a look at it. All right. Let's just start with context. So, as I mentioned earlier, and for those of you who joined the webinar, you will know that Pragma is a engineering services firm. We base our speciality all around engineering or the engineering science behind asset and maintenance management. And so we're uniquely aware of the type of challenges that our clients face. It's a changing environment, and you have to stay on your toes to be able to keep track. In the context of our current environment, we all know about the political and regulatory complexity. I'm not going to go into Trump's politics, but it's a very good example of how the instability can hit our environment quite quickly, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Our business has become more complex. You'll see the block on the right there talks about skills gaps, constant cost pressure, changes in operating model, and all of us in the asset management world are keenly aware of those. And then the one that everybody always likes to talk about is the changing technology world. There's always been a focus on technology in asset management, whether it's condition monitoring or the use of enterprise asset management systems. But with the evolution of data science and AI, that world is becoming a lot faster and a lot more complex. And I think those are all relevant to the asset management context. If you look at the trends that we sort of specifically derived and included, I'm going to ask you later in the presentation which of the ones that are not on the list do you think should have made it. There's obviously a lot more than 10 asset management trends. All of us have our favorite topics, but certainly these are the ones that we see a lot and that we think are worth watching because it's going to shape the way that we interact with our partner businesses, and that asset management evolves as a science across time. So just very quickly, and colleagues, we are not going to cover each one of these in detail. We simply don't have time in a 60-minute webinar. So we're going to touch on them briefly and talk to them as themes. So Dirk is going to talk about the technology themes. Philip is going to talk about the process and technical themes, and I'm going to talk about the impact on business models around supply chains and servitization. But if the high level trends are those on the screen. We talk about data quality, AI, machine learning, condition-based monitoring, condition-based predictive maintenance, precision maintenance, the emergence of a new focus on work management, our increased focus on integrating with sourcing and procurement. We specifically included one on the evolving servitization models for OEMs. And then there's two on knowledge and learning, which is the institutional knowledge and improving the impact of learning programs. And then I'll briefly touch on ESG at the end. So those are the 10 that we believe are the more important ones to focus on. But of course, there are subsets and there are other ones that could have made the list, but those are the ones that we chose. To start off this journey and the discussion, I'm going to hand over to Dirk to talk to us about the technology piece. And Dirk, with that, over to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those in North America. Yeah, it's absolutely my privilege to be here. It's my privilege to also work in this industry and to bring technology and solving business problems in this industry. And it's certainly an industry and environment that's constantly changing. And I think the one thing that is becoming quite abundantly clear to all of us is that asset management is no longer just a back office function. It's becoming more and more strategically relevant and becoming critical for businesses to achieving their business goals, all the way from operational efficiency to sustainability goals. It's just, especially sustainability goals. Myself and Stephan, fortunate enough to be in a conference 6 weeks or so ago in the UK, and probably half of the conference is all about sustainability goals. And I would imagine most of the people in this audience would have the same sentiment. We're seeing a big shift, and as people playing in the operational and in the industrial space, we've got a responsibility and a role to play with that. The environment we're playing in is also increasingly becoming more complex, and the challenges that our teams are facing. So we are challenged with objectives like better uptime of the equipment, better service delivery of our teams, greener operations, and all of that with lower cost. And everyone is looking at technology to solve this problem, right? So so without further ado, I'd like to share or take us through some of these trends that we are seeing, and it's from a technology point of view in asset management. And towards the end, I'd like to offer an opinion if this will in fact be the silver bullet or not that we all are looking for in this environment. So the first one that we're going to tackle is data quality. So the concept of digital twins has been around for a while. It's probably the last decade or so, and it's always held a lot of promise for us to do real-time monitoring, scenario planning, predictive maintenance. But the reality is a digital twin can only be as good as the data it's built on. And that is where most of the organizations that we're coming across and that we're seeing in the business out in the world out there is stumbling. Many sensors, IoT sensors, is becoming available. There's many advanced CMMS tooling and algorithms and all of that. But if your asset register is not accurate, or if the data is out of date, or your failure data that you're recording isn't properly captured, it simply won't work. You simply won't have the data to use to embrace technologies coming your way. In fact, we've seen time and time again where poor data and data collection have prevented exciting new initiatives like improved planning, space optimization, forecasting, ESG reporting, all of those things. It's prevented those initiatives from taking off just because inherently the business is not good enough in caring and looking after the data. So the message is very clear, and I hope I'm making it very clear. Before you can chase technology, get the fundamentals right. And the fundamentals in our case, and in most cases, is when it comes to asset management, is making sure your asset data is accurate, your asset hierarchies, all the detail that you have in place, your bill of materials, and ultimately making sure that your processes and governance framework is clear, it's well understood, so that the people collecting data and taking care of the data know what they need to do. Because if you don't have those things in place, all the shiny and smart stuff will never realize, and it will never happen. And that brings me now to the second trend, which is AI and machine learning, which is obviously the thing that everyone is talking about. Again, on that interesting trip that Stephan and I did, we were meeting with one of these large research agencies, and we were fortunate enough to have lunch with him. And the CEO of that business, Stephan, I mean, after the hour-and-a-half conversation, I think 80% of the conversation was all around AI, just asking us around AI. What is AI doing? Where's AI going? Oh, what have you seen? So it's dominating conversation, no doubt. In the past 18 months, we've seen this adoption explode in our environment. And the reality, it's slightly different to what everyone expected when it started. You know, I guess when we first saw the words artificial intelligence, we all thought maybe autonomous plants and robots running around and, I don't know, maintenance robots taking over the world. But that's not really where we will see the impact of AI in our environment first. Where we will see it is agents. Think of artificial intelligence agents that will become embedded in the technology platforms that you've selected. And these agents would be designed to actually simplify and improve the way people do work. These agents will be used to optimize your maintenance schedules. It will be able to automatically calculate risk factors, optimize certain costing decisions, be able to plan certain labor availability and scheduling people. And the reality is these agents are, are available, or it's becoming available. And certainly in our business, we're playing around quite a lot with that. And, running a technology business, we're constantly confronted with these questions, and it's becoming increasingly easy to build some of these agents. And these agents will ultimately be embedded into your business platforms. So expect that to happen. Personally, I don't think it's going to replace a lot of people. I think it will, streamline and free up people to be more creative and apply more critical thinking in the workspace. That's certainly what we're all hoping for, I guess. But the technology is becoming available, and we'll start seeing that emerging. The place where to start is obviously the question that everyone's got nowadays. And the successful deployment of these kind of agents starts with a well-defined value case. So you need to understand where this agent will play a role and where you embed it into a process and who will ultimately interact with this agent to make those decisions. But again, coming back to trend number one, these agents will only be able to make sense out of the data that it can analyze and can rely on. So your system of record will still be in place, and these agents will have to consume that, apply logic and expertise for it to make a decision. So first of all, again, have the data in place, understand the value that the agent can bring, and then you can start building these AI agents to help you. And then moving on to the third trend, and that is the acceleration of and adoption of condition-based and predictive maintenance in the field of asset management. And one of the, I guess, technology trends that's kind of pushing this along is the fact that sensor data sensor cost and the implementation of sensors on assets is becoming increasingly more affordable. And the same with edge computing, and perhaps even data also becoming more affordable as well. And that has allowed us to much more aggressively deploy technology to start monitoring assets and asset health in real time. And that has allowed us now to shift our maintenance tactics to really start utilizing condition-based maintenance, where in the past we were kind of fixed into this interval preventive maintenance mindset. We can now take real-time data, combine it with historical data, and predict failures, and use all of that to make optimized decision making in terms of what action to take. So we've all seen it. We know what it's about. The people certainly in this audience. So and we've seen it being deployed at scale, where you can have this maintenance strategy that you've defined and apply it at a specific asset out there in the field, and use that as input. The running hours, certain sensors, product it's been producing, this, whatever is a local condition, and use that to project, and forecast the maintenance work that needs to needs to happen on that specific asset, and will allow the people there at the asset then to make an optimized decision in terms of which scenario they want to take to ultimately execute it. And built into that forecast is, the cost profile, the risk profile, operating profile. So it's becoming incredibly exciting. And it's certainly a lot of businesses that we're seeing that's starting to invest in that and starting to get value from that as well. It requires investment in the technology, but also the change management as well, to get the people to understand, move away from the traditional thinking of interval-based maintenance and adopting the predictive and condition-based maintenance. The one thing that we must not forget is to be able to get that right, we still would require expertise of that equipment itself, deep expertise from a technical side, but also from an engineering side. And I think maybe in some of the later trends where we were touching a little bit on that, this, knowledge workers and the people and the skills that we'll have to still embrace, which technology won't ever be able to replace, certainly not in the near future. So beyond these three core trends, I think there's other things also to just take note of. We're seeing continued focus and energy going towards integration of systems to simplify supply chains and simplify IT landscapes so that data can be exchanged in the form of integration. One of these trends, and when Stephan is talking, we'll talk about how the integration of the maintenance and procurement cycle and the value that it will unlock. Certainly in our business, we're seeing, I don't even want to call it a trend. We almost want to call it the norm nowadays, where people need to integrate their maintenance process with their procurement process. Asset management will increasingly become more important, especially with the ESG conversation also picking up steam and the pressure that will come from that onto us. So we need to be ready for that. So what's my ultimate takeaway? Guys, data. We need to focus on data. We need to embrace the technology and ultimately be very clear on the problem we're trying to solve. Technology by itself will not mean much. It needs to be built on expertise and ultimately the data. So I think that's about hopefully a nice juncture point, Stephan, to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Dirk. We're going to talk a bit more about some of these technology integrations later. I just wanted to check. We had a few hands raised that popped on my screen there. Philip, I don't know if you're checking the comment section. Is there anything that we need to stop and address, or can we continue?
No, I haven't seen questions come through, Stephan. There were hands, but maybe they got shy. I hope they ask their questions in a minute. So,
with that said, thank you, Philip. Just again as an intro, we speak about technology. We speak about some technical and asset management technical and process trends, which includes learning, and then we're going to talk a bit about business models later. So, Philip, you're going to talk about the stuff that requires some heavy lifting on asset management. So, please I'll start your slide, and then you can go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephan. And thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here speaking to the group on the call. And I'm excited about the trends that we've been seeing, because I think, a lot of this is things that, as you mentioned, Stephan, from our assessment work that we do, that is my day job. It's good to see those things coming to light and actually getting attention across the spectrum. So to kick off, I thought, let me start with the one thing that is probably seen as one of the most fundamental elements of any good asset management or maintenance management business is work management, which is ensuring that maintenance work is completed by the right person at the right time to a specified level of quality. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of distraction to this fundamental element. All of the buzzwords and technology trends and very nice things that, as Dirk said, has kind of been a distraction, and in some cases, in many cases, kind of failed attempts at silver bullets. Everyone wants to implement the nicest, newest, hottest thing, hoping that it will solve all of their problems. And yeah, it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And with a distraction that brings, you kind of end up, well, we see clients end up sliding backwards a bit instead of having these silver bullets, be silver bullets. So in addition to that, work management is supported by, or should be supported by, strong tools and resources. Unfortunately, migration to the latest greatest ERP systems comes with a freebie PM module attached to the side, which is implemented by financial people. No offense to those on the call, but they're not asset management practitioners. They don't understand the needs, and the maintenance team is stuck with a tool that's not supporting their needs. And I think one of the good things, and referring to Dirk's comment around integration, is that because of this uptake in integration, we're able to, well, clients and asset management practitioners are able to implement best of breed asset management systems or enterprise asset management systems and integrate those back to those ERP systems, which is an increasing trend. We're seeing a movement towards these best of breed systems, which is great. And that supports good practice or good maintenance management practice in general. These systems are built with the practice in mind, as opposed to just being a work order repository. And we're also seeing maintenance planning becoming a real profession, with formal qualifications available in South Africa. This is this competence, this shift towards more competence in planning and scheduling of maintenance work is further driving this renewed focus in work management. So yeah, there is a real return to work management as a fundamental practice in asset intensive businesses, and the results of that speak to improved efficiencies in labor, in effectively increasing maintenance team capacities. I think we all know this, but as a more direct sort of ROI, we see more reliable equipment and peace of mind for asset owners, knowing that the required work is done in time by the right people and to hopefully the right level of quality. And just to interject there, one of the interesting things we noted in our assessment data, and there's a couple of these tidbits in the full report. I thought let's just pull out one of them, is that from a work management perspective, more mature organizations with regards to work management are seeing more or higher levels of performance. So that just supports the argument that work management is a fundamental practice, and it is something that supports more mature asset management environments in general as well. I think Dirk's comment around poor data quality, being a stumbling block for other initiatives. Well, if you think about where most maintenance data comes from, is from the work management processes in the business. So we're seeing that in our assessment data. and it's interesting that the thinking is supported by the real world findings. But just back to the quality and doing quality work, I think there is definitely, and we've been hearing it for years, that there is a technical skill shortage, and this means that the quality of work execution suffers. There's a strong emphasis on planning and putting in place standards and specifications when through the planning of maintenance work, which ties back into the work management process. But that in itself is not enough. And the concept of precision maintenance, which is really nothing more than doing quality maintenance work. The key difference is that this is through a systematic or programmatic approach, which really, this is a trend that we're observing, is this programmatic approach towards quality maintenance work execution. And that really speaks to the standards and specifications that guide technical staff in their work, in the way that they execute their work, and we're specifically referring to things like the fastening of equipment, manage vibration, and other elements that introduce failure. The specifications and standards around lubrication and alignment, and all of those things that traditionally has been taken for granted. People have said, a technician or a tradesperson has qualified through and they passed their trade test. These things are inherent in the way that they work. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. So this precision maintenance program focuses on putting in place standards and specifications and the tools and technologies to support the execution of work towards those standards. And of course, the third element being ensuring that people are indeed competent and not just trusting in the trade test, and that is the silver bullet, so to speak. And then I think that brings me to the next 2 points. The first being the trend around institutional knowledge, and the fact that skills are scarce increases demand on them, and that means people can go where they want, when they want, and that obviously that turnover results in a loss in institutional knowledge in businesses. So there's a strong shift towards the systematic management of knowledge by implementing knowledge management systems, capturing those nuggets of information that people typically keep in their minds, and obviously making that available to others in the business. And there's also a more structured approach to managing competence from a management system perspective as a basis for competence development. So the standards and procedures that make up these asset management systems inform role profiles, which in turn enable the development and implementation of learning pathways for these roles. And this structured approach ensures that employees are really capacitated to execute their roles in a way that supports the broader management system. So this all sort of ties up together into a nice big interrelated puzzle that if all the blocks fit nicely into each other, which I like. But obviously an additional factor is that the delivery mechanisms for competence development and training have changed, which allows for more efficient development of these competencies, and also reduces disruption to operations and allows employees to really retain information in a more effective manner. And the add-on, or the little bit to add on to this competence development, is really where coaching and mentoring comes in, as a supporting factor or theme to really realize the results or the return on investment from these training programs that cost a lot of money, but that traditionally there's a lot of, it's like marketing. You put up an ad and you hope that translates into some return if you're in marketing. In the same way, if you send people to training, you just hope and pray that they come back and they do something with that. And through coaching and mentoring, becoming more of a hard and fast kind of add-on to training programs, we see that learners or employees that have gone on to training, they just return to old habits in the workplace. They might feel constrained by established practices, and they don't always have the authority or confidence to change their way of working. But through coaching programs, they are typically encouraged to apply what they've learned, but to do so in a safe space with consistent support. And the mentoring programs that go with this allows employees to further develop a confidence with that they need, with the support from senior people, hopefully in the business, but sometimes outside of the business. And a kind of hidden benefit is that this allows for that internal transfer of knowledge and new ways of working in a sort of bi-directional way that gets leadership buy-in, because traditionally leadership in businesses haven't been too interested in what's going on from a maintenance or asset management perspective. And by introducing coaching or mentoring programs, they become involved in this kind of day-to-day, what could be seen as a day-to-day element, and it gets a lot stronger buy-in through that leadership support. So yeah, I think in not so much of a nutshell, but in closing, I think those four themes, might seem, or four trends might seem like these four very distinct elements, but at the end of the day, there are four things that, and really there's much more to it, but they talk to one another in such an integrated way that you cannot really get away from doing one without doing the other. And I think if we look even broader, the 10 trends that we've got all talk to one another in different ways. So I think the takeaway for me was just how well each of these trends really support one another, and that you can't try pick and choose and do one thing and forget about the other thing, because they all really are supportive of one another at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that's it from me. So back over to you, Stephan. Not sure if there are any questions, perhaps, or anything like that. Yeah,
I think this is a good time for us to deal with a question that's popped up on the screen. And I'm sorry, I can't see whether this is a gentleman or a lady. It's just W. Landsberg asked, the report addressed growing knowledge gaps as institutional knowledge is lost. Given the integration of AI into predictive systems, how would you advise clients to ensure the use of AI-driven systems can bridge those knowledge gaps instead of deepening them? I think, and I'll go first, but I'll invite the two of my colleagues to also venture an answer. I think it's a fantastic question, and simply because we are grappling with exactly the same dilemma in our own business. You're absolutely right, and Philip has addressed it now. There is a loss of institutional knowledge, especially in the technical workforce. And the rise of AI sort of hangs this carrot in front of your nose saying, the AI can do it all. It's okay if the knowledge is lost. And I think that's far from the truth. Now, we spoke about having learning pathways and proper role profiles and a talent pipeline to sort of replace the key resources in the business. And I think those are all relevant. But I also think capturing knowledge and having a structured document and knowledge management process inside of your asset management organization is critical. We've helped a number of clients start up communities of practice for their maintenance and reliability engineering fraternities, where they can not only discuss relevant topics and ask questions, but also have a sort of a structured way of capturing that knowledge. When it comes to the predictive systems, in the work that we're doing at the moment with clients and also in our own advisory business, the predictive systems are only as good as the algorithm that you train it on and the data that you train it on. And so I think even though it'll make the predictive analytics and failure prediction faster and easier to access, the ability to know, or to first of all do the technical investigation, but also have the experience to judge which operating and condition-based parameters are required to predict that failure is not something that will ever, I think, go away. It'll be easier and faster with AI tools to do that, but I don't think the requirement for human interaction and the ability to really apply engineering judgment to those systems will ever go away. So I'm sorry to not be able to give you a more clear answer, but I think it lies in, keep on training and refreshing the training in the workforce, have a clear pathway and a talent plan for how you want to replace your key resources. And then, from a prediction perspective, I think we're in the early days, but again, the model can only respond to what you tell it. And if you teach it the wrong thing, you'll never get the right answer. I always say to clients, digitization of a bad process only gets you the same crap faster. And I think that's probably the same when it comes to predictive analytics. Dirk or Philip, have you got a different view or a view that can augment?
Yeah, but perhaps just add to it. So I think you're right. So look, I think there's going to be two views. There's going to be a short and medium term view, which and we're living in that environment now, and we're going to have to get to grips with that. And then there's a longer term view, and I don't think we can all venture a guess. I'll rather focus on the short term, medium term, and I'm not even sure how long that will last. But I can give you a practical example where I've seen a bit of this happen and like to the benefit of the business. So in the past, and you would all have experiences where you often have your maintenance system and your production system living a little bit in isolation. And we've always struggled to integrate these two things properly. At times we get it right, but normally it's different people owning it and it's got different focus areas and areas of responsibilities. But now with AI being here, suddenly there's the option to not really having to integrate these two, but it's to rather wrap AI across both of them and let AI do the hard work, kind of connecting the dots between these two different worlds. And AI can do that. It's quite clever. You need to train it a little bit, give it some guidance, and then it figures it out. And then on top of that, and I'm getting to your question, you can start asking it some interesting questions around skill and people and ultimately, and that could be then an agent that I was talking about. So I've seen it now work in early days, but you can ask it questions. Who is the best person to fix this pump at this plant, for argument's sake? And this thing will then go through and measure the output, the performance side with the maintenance history side, and it will then give you a very nice breakdown around, person X is the best person for the following reasons, and it kind of gives you the rationale. So again, that's a tech side to the question, and then to the other side is then at least you know who's the person, and then there is a question around, and as Philip explained and as Stephan as well, where we still almost go back to the traditional way of applying then almost common sense to say, okay, how are we now going to extract the data out of person X's head and make sure we institutionalize it, capture the data. And I was talking about data, still capturing, getting the data, putting it into some other system of record so that the AI can ultimately use that the next time you ask it the question. And then you can start asking it the question, based on what person X did, how can we apply that to person Y? But yeah, so my prediction would be that you would use AI to make sense, much better sense around the data that you're currently collecting, and use that then to identify where the pockets of knowledge is sitting within your organization, and then you apply traditional skills and processes to extract and package that knowledge so that it can go back into this whole cycle. So that would be my recommendation, short/medium term recommendation. Exactly how it will work beyond that, where the AI or the machines can make sense of all of this by itself, I wouldn't venture a guess now. But Philip, maybe you've got something to add to this theory.
Yeah, no, I think you two gents have said it all. I think I'm a very quick adopter when it comes to AI and ChatGPT and all of these things to sort of generate ideas and sort of test my own. But the risk, and I'm increasingly realizing that, is that these systems are so yeah, they're perhaps not commercially OpenAI is still a non-profit, but they're trying to make profit. But regardless, they're trying to get you to use their system and continue using their systems, and they are programmed to please. So, and and to that end, if you ask them a question they can't answer, they'll make something up, and that's another risk that you're facing. So if you, yeah, there's a lot of risk. I That's the one thing to be aware of, but they can be great if you want to, if you know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about, and use them as a supplementary tool, but not as a, yeah, I wouldn't trust my I wouldn't trust a lot with AI, to be fair, but good supplementary tools to use.
Out of interest, I'll post it here in the chat. I wrote a little piece on LinkedIn around hallucination. It wasn't around asset management, it was around something else. But I mean, it was a very classic example, to your point, Philip, how these things can also get it incredibly wrong. So yeah, there's certainly in the short slash medium term, let's just be mindful that it's far from perfect. So I'll post it here in the chat, and maybe some people might find it funny or interesting.
So thanks, Dirk, for reminding me. That was a good read. Just a related question that has come in, Philip. This person asks, Mr. Hanekom mentioned the correlation. By the way, I'm not calling you Mr. Hanekom ever. But Mr. Hanekom mentioned the correlation between work management practices and improved asset management performance. How do you work to shift focus back to improving fundamentals when more complex systems are not ready to be implemented? So, Philip, I'll let you go first, but I also have something to add there.
Yeah, thanks. Look, it depends on the context. So, you get to, well, I've been to businesses where you've got people, often, senior management in the business, who are very excited about AI and the latest and greatest. And they say, well, guys, you've got these breakdowns, you've got these problems on the shop floor. Just go ask ChatGPT how to solve your problems. And, so, I'm simplifying the approach here, but, that thinking, or that sort of immature or environment where the real fundamental problems are not well understood, and having the authority in that business pulling you towards complexity when simplicity would be the answer, that's a very difficult environment. And I'd take a very different approach to driving back towards the basics in that type of environment than I would if there was a different context. But I think the problem is that if you're being pulled towards these complex systems and complex approaches when the fundamentals are not in place, there's in general a misunderstanding in the business around what is really the problem. So I think, if it's not there's no easy answer to it, but I think the context is important. So I can't answer you directly now and say this is what I would tell you to do, but I would definitely understand the context. I would understand why you're experiencing this pull towards complexity, and if that is indeed the right answer or not, that'll have to be a discussion within the business. But I think, there's ways and means to pull back to fundamentals. And I think the easiest thing would be, as Dirk said in the beginning, when you get to the complexity and you realize, well, geez, we don't have the data in our work management system to drive a predictive maintenance program. We don't have the capability to install and maintain a lot of sensors and process that data and develop algorithms and models to predict failure. Then that's going to be your first indicator. Listen, we actually pretty much physically cannot do this, but if that's the case, then why are we even thinking about doing it? But not to belabor the point, I think Stephan, you wanted to add something to that.
Philip, as always, you have a more nuanced answer than I do. I think my approach to this is normally quite straightforward, because the way that the maturity or the capability in asset management stacks on top of one another, and that a more advanced capability needs the fundamentals to be ready is pretty straightforward and easy to prove. And so, when we have this discussion with clients where they say, I'm ready to implement a new computerized maintenance management system, and I want all the fancy bells and whistles with advanced analytics and condition-based maintenance integrated. Asking them a simple question like, what is your work order completion rate at the moment? How good is your asset register? And if the answer is, I'll give you a practical example. We had a client coming to us a few months ago wanting to optimize maintenance plans. So they had maintenance plans in place, but they still didn't get the right level of reliability from their equipment. So we said to the client, what is your works order completion rate? And I said, it's 54%. I said, well, that's your problem. If you are not executing the work that you've planned, two things are true. You don't have control of your work management process, and you're not doing the work that you said you wanted to do on the equipment. So any reliability improvement you want or analysis you do is going to be done from the wrong fundamentals. And so, because the process is easy to manage, I think it's a pretty easy debate to have by saying to the guys, you want to make the car go faster, but if it's only got two wheels, you've got a problem. So I think Philip is right on context, but certainly something that I think if you take a hard look at the current performance of your fundamental processes, it's pretty easy to at least say, guys, there's a few things we have to fix before we go into a very complex systems-based environment. All right. I want to press on for time because I'm worried about us not necessarily finishing. I want to finish off by talking to the broader role that asset management practice is required to play in the business models of our clients and our businesses and your businesses. And the first thing that keeps on coming onto our radar is a requirement for better integration between the asset management and the supply chain functions. In the past, I think like supply chain, HR, and finance, maintenance was seen, or asset management was seen as a back office function. But there's a few things that have changed to bring the prominence, much higher up executive awareness. And one of them is the fact that global supply chains are becoming very volatile. We know with our own environment, I see our president has phoned Mr. Trump to ask for lenience on the tariff environment. But that one statement by a world leader has created chaos in the world supply chains. People are moving manufacturing bases around. Import and export is becoming very volatile as people direct stock that they have into different parts of the world. And it really is becoming a challenge from a procurement perspective. And historically, when spares have not been available in the maintenance space, people have been blaming procurement. And there's been a lot of focus to say, let's fix the supply chain process, let's buy more efficiently, let's do sourcing and procurement projects to make sure we buy from the right places. But the reality is, if the demand forecast coming from the engineering team is not right, even if you have a perfect procurement process, they are still going to buy the wrong stuff. And so what we're seeing now is a awareness between those teams to say, yes, there's a requirement for us to buy dynamically, flexibly, being able to deal with these supply chain disruptions, but it has to start off with a proper understanding of what we need to buy and what the right service levels are that needs to be in the spares value chain. So we see a lot of clients now focusing on having the proper bills of materials, especially during project phases when they're doing maintenance readiness, to say, let's develop the bill of material. And once we've done that, let's do a proper work plan with spare parts and skills for our maintenance environment so that we actually start getting a proper forecast of demand. We do some space criticality and equipment criticality to understand what our required service levels are going to be. And then we can start really giving the supply chain colleagues a proper view of the demand with the criticality and the required lead times. And then the guys can do a better job at buying the spares that we need. It also answers questions that a lot of our finance colleagues often have is, why are we holding so much stock? Why are we losing time because there's no spares available? Do we have the right insurance spares? All of those questions are answered from an engineering perspective, even though the supply chain and finance guys very often ask the questions. So we're seeing a lot of emerging trends, and there are some very sexy things that AI can do in terms of cleaning up master data. If you've got bad levels of codification in the business, for example, we've seen some very exciting ways to use AI to clean up master data using reference databases to suggest possible codification solutions. And internally, we're doing some interesting work at the moment at using AI and historical data to build maintenance plans a lot faster. So there's a lot of tech that can make it faster. But the point here is this is an engineering solution first and a procurement solution second, not the other way around. Dirk, you had some points around integration on the technology side earlier. Is there something that you wanted to add there?
No, I think you covered it. And I think the point that I'm making, that certainly the projects that we're involved with, I'm struggling to think of any where it's not becoming mandatory. Like everyone kind of accepts it. Now, the nice thing is technology nowadays allows for it. The challenge is the business analysis to try and figure out exactly how the process flows needs to work and all of that. But actually solving it technically is, and that's, I guess, yeah, so not even technology worthy anymore. It's something that one can do quite easily. So it's but ultimately coming back to the skill, at what point will AI will other agents be able to portray the role of business analyst? I don't think we're close to that yet. So ultimately having that skill within your business, that is something that you probably already value quite a lot in your business, and those are the people you need to look after within your business, the guys that really understands these process flows across disparate systems and how these things ties together. In my view, in the near-term future, that will remain a critical skill that you need to hold on to.
See another question here from Jan Grobler. He asks, in your opinion, between the machine owner, asset management system provider, and I'll tell you why I chuckle now, Johan, or Conmon service provider, who is the best party to take ownership of the AI agent which is ingesting the online condition monitoring data? Now, the reason I'll chuckle, and you see Dirk is also smiling, this is a fight as old as condition monitoring data. I think when we started working in this world, the large system integrators like Siemens or ABB, for example, was very tight-lipped around, this is my data and I'm not allowed. And we had situations where OEMs were refusing the client who owned the asset access to the data, which is ridiculous in my opinion. Now, I'll give you 2 points of view, and I'll be interested to know if there's alternatives out there. The textbook answer is data is becoming democratized. Data, the ability to lock people out from data streams is frowned upon in the many of the mature clients. And there's a strategy in place to say we'll make somebody responsible for getting a clean data set available. So that that's a challenge on its own to make sure that we have the right data set and a clean data set available. But once it's available, everybody that has a business reason or a technical reason to access the data should access that data, and they should have free access to that data, whether that's the condition monitoring service provider, the asset management system supplier, or the owner. The only thing I can say in it is the second point of view to that is I will say that the machine owner has ultimate ownership and right to access that data. And if there's a risk-based or a cybersecurity-based reason why they want to restrict data to some other vendors, that's there are some options around that. But if I get very surprised and grumpy when I see a OEM or a service provider telling an asset owner they can't have access to the data coming from that machine. It's a very narrow view of the world, and I think in many cases we've seen cases where the data is made available to all of the interested parties, and it really removes this he said, she said debate around what's actually going on. So it can work, but Johan, I acknowledge it's a messy and complicated discussion, and I don't think there's a common answer that works for everybody. I don't know if Philip or Dirk, if you ever got a different view there, but certainly we're seeing sort of the democracy in the data lake space becoming more and more common.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe I think there's a distrust still, and that's why Johan is asking the question, right? There's a distrust between these three parties. So it's ultimately, I think the question that needs to be solved is how can we create trust between the three parties, and then ultimately talk to business models. How can we align business interests better? And I think you're going to get to servitization a little bit later in your conversation. I think the last point I want to make, I know the OEMs in Europe certainly is very nervous because there's a new legislation that's coming out, machinery legislation. I don't know if perhaps it's part of your slides here. Maybe I'll just post a link to that as well, where the legislation is all about the access of data, and the asset owner needs to have access to all data generated on its equipment. So, yeah, exactly how that will play out, let's see. But I hope that answers your question in some degree. I think all the data generated, ultimately, the asset owner should have access to it to be the first point of call to see if they can make use of it, and then on top of that, bring expertise to help them, being the maintenance service provider or the OEM.
Colleagues, we're running close to the end of the webinar, so if you don't mind, I'm going to run through the last two topics and maybe just pause for a last poll. So the two trends that remain, and one that Dirk has alluded to, is that OEMs, or the manufacturers of capital equipment, are facing a world now where capital is becoming scarce. Sustainability requirements are putting a lot of pressure on the build versus buy debate, and their margins are under pressure. And so we've seen a move towards servitization, which effectively is, in its end state, can become as sophisticated as outcome as a service. In other words, if I'm selling a bottling machine to a brewery, what the brewery is buying from me is bottles per hour, or a number of bottles bottled, not the bottling machine. Or in the case of a piece of mining equipment, number of tons moved as opposed to the actual machine itself. And so we're seeing a lot of the OEMs moving into a variety of different servitization models that starts with something simple like a proper spare part supply chain, and moves all the way through, training, advisory services, and a variety of different commercial constructs around outcome as a service or data as a service. So there's a lot of exciting movement in that space, and it's useful to both the OEMs because their margins improve and their value chain stretches longer, and also for the owners of that equipment. They get much more flexible commercial arrangements. Their capital requirements reduce, and there's a lot of movement in the space. It does open up the debate raised earlier by Johan around access to data, for example. But I think, suffice to say, this is a space we're watching closely, and something that we think there's a lot of interesting asset management related movement going to happen in the next few years. And then the last one, which I think Dirk has raised, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, is that we live in a world where the public, the users of our goods and services, shareholders, governments and regulators are all becoming a lot more forceful around the need for responsible practices in business. And ESG regulation and reporting requirements are becoming a lot more visible and a lot more stringent. And so we're seeing, in the context of asset management, things like sustainable procurement, waste and emission reduction, the selection or modification of equipment to be more energy efficient, the reporting of carbon footprints of supply chain are all becoming a requirement. And there's a lot of work being done in support of the ESG agenda in the asset management space to make sure that the right skills are there in the people to do the reporting, that maintenance practices are modified to take things like battery-driven tools, the minimization of carbon footprints of supply chain in the context of procurement, and a number of other elements are taken into account to make sure that the ESG agenda that is so prominent is being supported by the asset management fraternity as well. Now, I need to ask you a question. And Lisa, if you wouldn't mind putting up the poll, we've covered 10 of these trends at a very rapid pace. How many of you are seeing these actual trends manifest in your business or in your role at the moment? If I can have a quick indication there. And I'm sure that not all of you are seeing all of them, but I'd be interested to see if there's how many of these trends are actually being manifested in your current role or in your business at the moment. That's a multiple choice. You can select as many as you want. And while you're doing that, if you wouldn't mind in the chat, we obviously like to think that we've done a good job in terms of selecting this trends list. But if there's anything that you think we missed or that should be on the list that you'd like to see on the list for future analysis, I'd also be very interested in your opinion there. So if you've answered the poll and you have an opinion on trends that we may have missed, please go to the comment section or the chat room and just make a comment there around where you think we've had or what we could be adding to this list and sort of improving our reports going forward. All right. Seeing some good info coming through. I think while that's happening in the background, you can see there's a QR code on the screen. And we will see, so if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to our webpage where you can download the report. We will also be sending everybody that was registered for the webinar a link so the guys can download the report if you haven't read it already. And being 2 minutes over our agreed time, maybe let me pause there and see if there are any final questions. Please carry on answering the poll, but I want to make sure I try and stick to the time mandate. Let me see, there's a question here. Maniki, how are you? Speaking of access to data for the asset owner, the recent incident of Air India crash speaks volume. How can we, as asset maintenance experts, play a role? Well, first of all, I'd make sure that we service the plane properly so it doesn't fall out of the sky. I mean, that's the place to start, right? Maniki, it's an interesting question. I think, the owner, Air India, as far as I'm concerned, has 100% a right to claim access to that data. If Boeing has got something, or Airbus, I can't remember who the manufacturer was there. If they are not fully transparent on the data with the asset owner, because it's a massive liability for the asset owner, right? I mean, all of the lawsuits and the claims against the financial claims are going to hit the airline, not the asset manufacturer. Although I would be interested to see what Air India's response is in terms of suing the manufacturer. So it's their natural instinct, I would, to be protective of that data. I'm not sure that us as asset owners or maintenance management professionals have a role other than to make sure that, especially in the case of critical assets like airplane components, that the maintenance is properly planned and that the documentation, that the proof that it has been done up to standard and that the proper QA tests have been done are there. I mean, that will certainly go a long way to sort of help the failure analysis and understanding, assigning culpability, if you will. But I think once that accident's happened, I think it becomes a legal fight very quickly. And so access to data there, I think, shouldn't be disputed. It should be available to all parties. And then if somebody really did make a mistake, then they should own up to it. But I think that's going to be a very, very messy legal battle. All right, colleagues, that's it. Philip, Dirk, are there any closing comments that you guys want to make before we let the people go on their merry way?
No, I just want to thank you for your attention and the questions and interaction. Look, we can probably spend the whole afternoon talking about this, and perhaps we should. So thanks for your willingness to contribute, to reading up on it, and for contributing to our industry. Thanks for that, and for everyone's contribution in that.
Yeah, thanks. I echo that. I think there's a lot to talk about, and I think all three of us like to talk about this stuff, so we could carry on. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out and obviously make contact, and we're all available, and we can make our contact details available to you if there's further discussion that someone wants to have. But appreciate all of your time. Thanks.